a little data, a little options flow, a little bit of everything.
Well, that's the way you
Best
want
I
it,
can.
like, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Reese Politics on X and Reese Politics on YouTube. Thankfully, the same person. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here. I appreciate what you're doing. And I'm super excited to talk about the most interesting thing in all of finance right now, which is GameStop.
As ever, the most interesting thing. So, what turned you onto the GameStop story in the first place? Like, are you an OG 2020 holder?
I am an OG 2020 holder, and I think that's part of what turned me on to it. But if you're just on social media in general or in tune with anything going on in the stock market, it's hard not to be at least keeping an eye on GME. I will say what happened following January and February of 2021, and I guess you can include March in that too, or April, whenever it peaked next for the third time. Um, you know, getting beaten down, and this is not exclusive to GameStop too, although GameStop did get beaten down quite a lot in 2022, but a ton of stocks did, and it sucked. It absolutely sucked to see the red in the portfolio, even in great companies too. And I'm not saying GameStop's not a great company. It is, in my opinion. This is not financial advice, and anything I say on this show should not be misconstrued as such. But we witnessed a lot of red for a pretty good amount of time. And it really, I think, didn't change until we saw that glimmer of hope when Roaring Kitty liked that Run Lola Run meme in late April of 2024. So I think it's just kind of encapsulation of, we've been beaten down, whether you want to call it crime, whether you want to call it whatever. I'll listen to you say that, but I just want to see people succeed on this. I want to see people get paid from this. And I want GameStop to fundamentally transform their business in the process of all of this. So it's kind of like that synergy of all things coming together everywhere all at once.
How do you feel about Ryan Cohen? I know there's some haters.
Yeah, I completely sympathize with the haters who don't like seeing the huge red candles down during a share dilution. Absolutely, fully understand the negativity surrounding that. But I think now if we've learned anything from the past 6 months, and I hope we've learned things from 2020 and 2021 as well, but specifically now when Ryan's in charge and pulling the levers on these things, is that it's not a bad thing. And it can be transformative, for your business, and specifically a business that is looking, in my opinion, to modernize. And when you think about gaming too, like if we even just zoom out, and it's not just Ryan Cohen, but it's gaming in general, one of the fastest growing places, dollars being spent like crazy, games being developed like crazy, hardware being developed like crazy, right? We zoom out and we think, what are the mainstays in gaming? And the first thing that I think of is GameStop, maybe GTA next, right? Like Fortnite now is carved out of space, right? But when you think of gaming, you think of GameStop. So yes, it sucks that he dilutes, but I think he's pointed. I think he's shrewd. I think he makes those hard decisions that a lot of people don't agree with. But now, as of late November, when you and I are talking, it has aged like fine wine. And I think it just getting that $4.20 billion in cash, the floor moves higher on the stock. It's easier to justify any M&A that they might be working on, or even if Ryan, who is one of the best investors of all time, by the way, look at the guy's portfolio and his returns, who would you rather have holding that money? No one. I mean, sure, Roaring Kitty, okay, it's a retail side of things, maybe, but Ryan Cohen really is that guy. So I have no problem with his dilutions. And as you and I are both aware of, he is authorized to do more.
Mm-hmm.
And that is firmly on the table. And it's going to suck if it does happen, but it's absolutely a possibility. And we shouldn't just turn a blind eye to it.
What do you think what is the money for? Like, obviously no one knows except him and probably maybe a few insiders, but like, what's it for?
It's a great question. And I think learning from, let's say, June of 2024, okay, when Roaring Kitty was back, he was posting memes in like a 15-minute cadence. It was the best thing ever. He's super calculated. Every meme seemed to be speaking of some sort of timeline, right? And in that process, with the dilutions that we witnessed, we were all kind of thinking, at least I'm speaking for some of my followers on X, but we were kind of thinking, oh, this is probably going to be used to announce a merger and acquisition of some sorts during the shareholders meeting that was coming up in early June. But if you've been around GameStop, and this is not just exclusive to GameStop, shareholder meetings really, unless you're Tesla and Elon Musk takes over the shareholders call and starts talking about rockets, robots, self-driving cars, and all that other fun stuff that the stock likes to Aladdin and the other BlackRock algorithms somehow start ripping on in after hours, you know that you're not going to get much information on a typical shareholder meeting, at least from GameStop and a litany of other companies that are publicly traded securities. So the cash, to answer your question, the cash, I would hope, is either M&A of some sort eventually. And these things should not be overnight impulse decisions, right? That would be reckless. But if you find a way to acquire a hardware producing company, a company with good IP, something to that effect where they can really boost their revenue. And I will say they're doing a nice job of that. At least it seems in PSA and the card grading aspect of their business, which certainly is a nice revenue stream. But I think I can speak for some of the community when I say that that's not really moving the needle. When we think of $4.2 billion, we're not really thinking of grading cards and collectibles. And certainly that's going to be a good aspect for the bottom line and hopefully for Q3 earnings report, but not to the point where, oh my gosh, the mother of all short squeezes has been initiated because they're going into PSA. Like it's just not happening. So to answer your point, I hope they use it for some sort of shrewd investment like that. And worst comes to worst, if they are going to take the Tesla route or the MicroStrategy route, which again is at this point, Michael Saylor is so far ahead of everybody else. But to invest in crypto or to invest in something that could be a high yield investment certainly could boost GameStop's cash value to eventually get to a very high level of M&A where they do acquire something that is high revenue generating from day one.
So, do you think the Michael Saylor MicroStrategy thing is like to the people who are constantly plugging it in my feed and have been for 18 months or more? Ben Verman and Peruvian Bull, both of them.
Yeah, I've seen them all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them now, though. It's funny. It's like if we've learned anything too about the past 4 years.
Ben has been on this for a long time.
Yeah, like I love people with high conviction. So Michael Saylor, like that checks the box of like a leader. So I always, when I invest in something, and right now I'll just be candid, I'm fully ported in GameStop. So I really have no other time to really think about these other companies or what they're doing, but I do keep tabs on it. And a leader with a high level of conviction like Saylor is very, very good if obviously you make the right bet, which in my opinion he has. But I do see shades of Ryan Cohen in that too, where that decision at one point in time was not popular. Okay, like if you remember the crypto winter, which lasted for what, like 18 months maybe, and everyone was we were all panicking and whatever, but that decision has aged beautifully. So if you wanted to go back to the shared illusions or leadership style, whatever you want, like Ryan Cohen checks that same box too. And that's another reason why I have full confidence that if he does continue to raise more cash at the expense of the shareholders right now, or at least in our portfolios, long term, we'll be sitting much better because of someone like that.
If they had already invested, when would they have to tell us?
Well, there's certain. So I was digging into this a few weeks ago, right? Because there was a lot. I don't know if you saw the post, but there was a lot of speculation, and the same thing happened. It's hilarious in June too. It's like we're living through the same timeline. Literally, we're just in November now, right? So, where people thought that the first couple dilutions were going to be used to invest in Bitcoin, right? Like that theory floated around then heavily too.
Yeah.
And so that filing, and I think I found it through Tesla. Was released in their year-end 10K when they first bought their big chunk of Bitcoin. So I don't think you have to report that right away. You're not held to the same. I think it would be 4 days if it were some sort of thing that would affect the fundamental makeup, I believe is the exact language from the SEC, of your business. So I think if it was an M&A of sorts, that would have to be reported very quickly. Whereas if it's investing in a higher yielding asset, and you feel free to, anyone in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you have a longer runway there just from some digging I've done on companies that have done the Bitcoin thing.
Let's check. I'm gonna Google that, or I'm gonna grok it actually after.
Yeah. So I found it in Tesla's 10K, I believe. It might have been from 2020 or 2021.
When would a company have to declare they bought Bitcoin? Let's find out. Grok will give us the answer or at least an answer.
And you should ask Grok too while you're at it. Why would a company CEO tweet and delete YOLO? Uh,
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I would say lawyers.
yes, and I'm sure he got a message like 30 seconds after he posted that to delete that. So
They're saying in quarterly reports.
okay,
Thank
there you
you.
go.
Yeah.
So it would it would be. I think we would have a little time there.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes. So again, but
Because when is
like
it? It's
like I
is
said,
it
like
is
the,
it?
the point that I want to make is like don't get your hopes up on that premise alone. Like there's more going on to the saga. It's probably a good transition to talk about Roaring Kitty too. There's way more going on to this saga and why I'm so entrenched in GameStop than just what Ryan Cohen is doing to transform the company, right? Like Roaring Kitty didn't come back for a burp to $60 and to bag everybody and say, okay, see you guys later. Like
Yeah, right. What is going on with Roaring Kitty? What do you think? And what is happening with the Treehouse Brewing Company? Like, what
that
what are they
I
doing?
mean, if you want to get straight into the tinfoil there, that one's
Yeah.
weird. And I have spent way too much time, probably much to my family's chagrin, digging into any private investors of that brewery, like in some remote town in Massachusetts. Like I've dug into this, admittedly, and I have no shame saying that. I have, I've spent quality time doing that. But I do think that it being his favorite beer, uh, certainly is interesting. Maybe he spent time talking to the owners of that brewery. Maybe he has been trading from a bar stool in that brewery. I mean, there's many things that could be. At the end of the day, I think I have to concede that they are genius at marketing. They are plugged into this cycle as well. Something about him drinking their beer has piqued their interest in this cycle. And maybe they do know a little something, and I hope they do. But if for nothing else, it's maybe the best example of grassroots or guerrilla marketing, excuse me, I've seen in the past 5 years easily.
What if he bought the brewery?
I've thought about that, and it would be quite. I mean, for him and the amount of cash that he stacked up over the past 5 years,
Yeah, how much? How
it's.
much could it
I mean,
possibly be?
it wouldn't even make a dent, I'm sure, in his holdings. So it's possible, but I did look for literature on that, and I did not come up with anything in the business records.
Okay. Treehouse Brewing Company. It's got a Wikipedia page. Okay. Hang on, let me just pull this up for people so they can see what I'm seeing. Treehouse Brewing Company, 60 miles west of Boston. Non-distributing brewery, only available to buy on site.
Right. So what you just said, they're close to Boston. That checks one box, location. And then two, only available to buy on site. He would have had to have been there in the past to buy the beer that he drank on his most recent live stream. So, again, this is a big reach. I know it's a big reach, but there could be something there. I don't think it's worth just dismissing it. In the same vein, honestly, there's people that dismiss FTDs. There's people that dismiss cost to borrow. There's people that dismiss all these things at face value. And it's like, if you've been around the GameStop saga, like nothing can be dismissed.
Yeah, I mean, the 741 thing alone.
Okay, right. And
That's just
I'll even say like the baby people or the BBY people, like I haven't dug too much into that, but to just dismiss it at face value, I think is reckless. Like Ryan Cohen has obviously been tied to that before. He's been in litigation with it. Like I'm not a super big believer in that, but I wouldn't count out anything right now. Like that, I think that would be foolish.
I think it's curious. Like people like Ryan Cohen don't just stick money into something, sort of like play around very temporarily and then just remove it and leave. Right? There was some
No,
other
and
there was some
like
other
even
reason
if
for getting involved there.
a person that is as calculated as Ryan Cohen has been with his business ventures and his investments doesn't just do that for the sake of doing it, right? Like whether he was trying to do a hostile takeover or any of that, that's could be, right? To blow up the basket. Maybe that's what Roaring Kitty's doing. Like that could be. So just trying to make the point that like I get some people in my replies saying, oh, stick to price, stick to this, and I'm just saying like you can stick to that, but I would rather try and know a little bit of everything and not be caught off guard when one of these many theories does hit and come true. And then it's like, see, we told you so.
Do you think there's just so many theories that one of them has to be true at this point?
Well, I think that's it's funny because I'm only laughing because like I'm laughing at myself and how many hours I've dedicated to reading pretty much every one of these series under the sun. To me, it really boils down to what Roy and Kitty saw though initially, and like let's just take Ryan Cohen, like let's just trust that he's transforming the business, which I believe he is, and all those good things. But if we're just zeroing in on Roy and Kitty and any theories regarding him, I think there's multiple things at play. And I did make a bold prediction on my X account today about what I think he might be doing now. I think the most interesting thing to me is that he is, if you've studied his posts before, if you've studied his live streams from predating when GameStop had its first big run up in January of 2021, you see how calculated he is. Like, just pull up one of his investment spreadsheets that he used to use, and you can find these on Reddit, by the way, if anyone's curious about these things. Like, there is so much information in those spreadsheets. He knows like everything about a company or an equity like that he was potentially investing in, right? So to call him and say, oh, he just saw the RSI dipping on the chart and he thought it was repeating, like that's probably one of the things he saw. He probably also saw swaps coming due literally to the day in May, right? There was a couple, I think a handful of days in May and then another one in June. The Chewy play is another card in his deck, in his Uno card deck. We'll use a reference there. Because what was he doing with Chewy, right? Was he just mimicking Ryan Cohen's kind of style of purchasing and transforming? Was he blowing up the basket, which I think he absolutely is doing or has done, and now it's a ticking time bomb? Or was he banking on Chewy swaps being converted? And this one's probably the most outlandish, but I think there's validity to this. There have been computer programmers on Reddit digging into Chewy swaps that are due, coincidentally, that have come due in the past 2 weeks. GameStop, coincidentally, in the past 2 weeks is up 30% and change, right? Did he manage to flip Chewy swaps to have them due on GameStop due to ETF rebalancing, which if you've been following Saga, ETFs that hold GME also hold Chewy, okay? There's a lot of things at play, and to your point, like, which one of the theories is it? I think it might be all of those everywhere, every time, all at once.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities. It's so weird. It's so difficult to like try and yeah.
But I think what's interesting about this time is that the same signs from the run up in late 2020 and early 2021 are there. The fails to deliver on ETFs. I don't know if you saw this, but on IWM, there was over $1 billion of fails in September on one day, over $1 billion. And if you just look at the data, and I'll pull this, I have it up in front of me because I want to be specific here.
Yeah, share your screen if you want.
So there was on September 20th, and this is from chartexchange.com. September 20th. Okay, and this is all the time around when people were speculating that Keith Gill sold Chewy, right? And then he had to file, I think, was it 45 days later or 35 days later or something? There's so much T, 35, T plus 69, T plus 4. There's so many things. But there was $1.2 billion of fails on IWM on September 20th. That is absurd.
Wait,
that's not just
for GameStop.
No, for IWM.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, and that holds all the big boys.
Yeah.
That holds all small caps. Okay. Why on earth would there be a $1.2 billion in FTDs that day? And then if you look at the next day, they claim to have closed out all but $4 million of those, which I'm sorry, but that just can't be. It cannot be. They must have had to create relentlessly, borrow against that, and then report that, hey, we found all these and everything's all tidy. I don't believe that for a second. You saw the same thing on XRT, not to the tune of $1 billion, okay, but hundreds of millions of dollars. It's huge. It's huge money. And they're just playing, in my opinion, they're just playing hot potato with these ETFs, where they're going to fail the ETF, they're going to redeem the ETF, they're going to create the ETF, and then they're going to borrow against that creation, creating this kind of infinite hot potato pattern where, and you want to talk about MOAS. I'm not even a MOAS guy, okay, but that is a MOAS rocket launcher that's bigger than SpaceX. Like that thing would zoom. If a fraction of those, if you were even held accountable on a fraction of those.
Yeah, the problem is that there is no holding the account on fails because, as Dr. Trimbath has pointed out
Yeah,
numerous
no.
occasions, they choose
And
to
that
roll them over forever.
like
It's infuriating, though, right?
exactly. But I think that's what it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the puzzle. It's important to watch that because you can get a sense of when they will have to redeem those, when they will have spikes in price, when T35 plus C or whatever it is now is, pertaining to that situation where it might impact the price of the equity. Like that, I think is important, especially if you're day trading the stuff, which I don't do now. I do trade calls on GameStop. Um, but you have to really look at all of these. And I think cost to borrow is another one I wanted to touch on with you too, where you saw the lend pool completely drain at multiple points. And it's obvious what they're doing with that too. You can see them do it every Sunday now. It's the same exact thing.
Hmm.
When futures open and a few hours before the Robinhood, I call it fake trading. It's the overnight hours. It's a complete scam. And I have no evidence of that. I don't want any legal penalty. It's, in my opinion, I think it's a scam. You see the same thing. You see them borrow about 500,000 shares of GameStop on Sunday. And this is just from Interactive Brokers. They borrow out 500,000 shares. All of a sudden by 9 a.m., the shares are returned and GME is down in pre-market like 2% on like hardly any volume. And you just have to think like, that's interesting. And yet the borrow fee goes down and down and down. And it's like they're begging people to borrow those shares, which in my opinion, like might not even exist. Really. It's like all these conspiracy theories, whatever you want to call them, it's all possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to read a little bit from my book. Hang on. That there was when I was talking to trade spotting Jamie, what an absolute hero that he is.
Legend, by the way. Talk about an OG and TA. I've learned TA from a lot of his stuff. So
Like even like just the way he describes, and this is what I want to read, the way he describes like trying to understand what the other person on the other side of a trade might be doing, and like the battles that go on like between hedge funds and institutions, maybe even just like individuals like who are directing a trading strategy. So it says you anticipate that person lying to you and to manipulate you to take advantage of their own trade, and so you work around that. There's that cat and mouse game everybody plays all the time, apart from the odd one or two who probably never do at the end of the day. It's layers within layers within, and then um, he goes on to say like what's really going on in the market you don't see, you know. What's important when you're in hedge fund mode is not to do anything remotely truthful because the truth is so against your view, and it's important to create a new truth to develop that fiction. It's like
that's literally what's going on. Like, and that's why people saying, "Oh, they cleared those out," or "Oh, they returned all this." It's like, no, I don't think they did, but they're creating that truth, and then the data is telling us that that's truth, but yet I am hard pressed to believe that truth.
yeah, and honestly, like, and this is something I want to ask. Is like, right, okay, so we know the FTDs can be rolled over to forever, and we know that liquidity is the goal forever, and ultimately we really don't know how many shares are floating around, and even then, if we did, if you want to buy something, it's always available because the market makers just will print it out of thin air in order to like satisfy that infinite liquidity. Like, is there anything real in the stock market? Like, to what extent do you think that it's actually like an accurate reflection, like broadly, of like the price of a stock? Like, just zooming out from this one individual where
Mm-hmm.
we've all been hyper focused on it, right? We've been watching how non-real the price can be. Like how widespread is this like fabrication?
Well, I mean, to give a lazy answer to start, no, I don't think much of it could be real. However, I think there's examples of this. Like Tesla is a great example of what I think GameStop is kind of experiencing to a certain degree now, where you had this tremendous brand that wasn't wildly popular, at least in terms of driving sales to their product, right? and you had a leader with this very strong and almost crass to certain people. I think Elon's tremendous, but to certain people, he's crass. Of a company that was shorted into Earth's core, and instead of just backing down and saying, okay, I surrender, or, we're going to let the company go bankrupt, Elon fought for his company's life, for his employees' lives, for his shareholders' lives, and said, no, we are going to stick at this because this is a great company, it's a great brand. And eventually, Wall Street had to change their tune on Tesla. Go back to Tesla in 2019 and look at the stock price. Your jaw will hit the floor. Okay. Look at what happened on that run up. And what changed that and what became more real of Tesla is that their financials started improving slowly but surely. And yes, it was still highly speculative and you're still very forward looking. Remember, that was the era of everything forward looking ran thousands of percent. But Tesla happened to run 2,000% over those next 2 years. Why? Because Elon finally was able to say to Wall Street, they have nothing against this company now, and it's time to start buying in. Or in GameStop, to quote a GameStop line, where are the shares? It's time to buy the shares. And I think Ryan Cohen is doing that same thing to a certain extent. And obviously they're not selling EVs, and I hope they don't get into EVs. But you know what I'm saying in terms of like, it becomes more real when you have a legitimate case to say, we have transformed this business. This business is not at risk of going bankrupt. And this is going to be an industry staple for decades and decades and decades to come.
Mm. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what he's trying to do ultimately, is to like reroot themselves into the foundations of American retail. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's doing a good job. I mean, look what he did with Chewy, right? Like you could play devil's advocate and say, oh, why not just get it on Amazon? But Chewy has found a way to keep niching down their revenue streams. So now you can order like vet prescription only medication and get it delivered to your door in like 24 hours on
Wow.
Chewy. Like you can't do that on Amazon. And I just think that's one of Ryan Cohen. He's got his fingerprints on that stuff. Like those are ideas that, yeah, it's not going to blow out revenue, but it's going to create all these supplemental streams of things that start to add up. And then Wall Street, then in return, when they have really their algorithms running, crunching the numbers, but you're going to start seeing numbers and you're going to start saying, wow, they're really making a dent in their profitability. They're really, now we're seeing quarter after quarter, their margins improving. And all of a sudden, then in a few years, and to quote Roaring Kitty, what's 2 years in terms of waiting in the market? It's really not that long. That's a great amount of runway for Ryan Cohen to start really tapping in on some of these other areas where I think GameStop can really expand to.
Yeah, and so is this the reason that institutions are loading up?
Mm,
Like, what is going
I,
on there?
I,
Like, we're,
I feel less conviction about that. I do think, and I saw Charles Payne, who's a Fox business anchor, post about this on X this morning, that Wall Street's actually jumping on the bandwagon now, which to your point is backed up by all the institutions buying this. And I think the first thing that I see in the replies to that question, at least from my followers, is okay, well, they're just going to lend out the shares. And that could be okay. Like, I'm not going to argue against that. There's no point. We've seen everything in GameStop at this point. But I think the more important thing is that 60% of funds are buying, 40% are selling. Those 60% that are buying, I think, are finally starting to give in and say, whoa, GameStop has a lot of cash on hand. They are still relevant. They're still improving their financials in good quarters, historically good quarters. I'll add that as a caveat. Uh, and they're not at risk now of going bankrupt. And it's time that we take ownership in this because we want to be on the right side of this trade, which, as you know, and probably anyone that follows me know, I think it is the only trade to be had in the market, not financial advice. Forget MicroStrategy, forget Tesla in 2019. Like, I think this is the play. That's just me talking here. But I think that's what you're witnessing is them starting to say, okay, we have to have shares for this. It's just too much of a risk to be caught on the other side of this. And I always think about this too. Would you rather be on the bleachers watching this transformation and risk missing out on whatever magic Ryan Cohen's working, whatever Roaring Kitty saw, whether he's just look at his public charts, by the way, on stockcharts.com. His profile is Rory Kittinger. Like, he saw this to a penny when the RSI got to a certain level. He posted that publicly for everyone to see. Then he started doing his meme thing. Like, these two guys are absolutely brilliant. And I would rather be in the arena with them fighting this fight than watching in the bleachers while everyone, in a few years is talking about one of the biggest moments in market history.
Rory Kittinger, here he is. Dun, 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 dun.
And I always, so if, for anyone that wants to look at these charts, you can search them. And Reddit still has a link to them. The monthly chart that Roaring Kitty highlighted is, and if you want to start talking about fractals or anything, like I don't love fractals and I don't love things repeating itself, but I think the fractal in combination with swaps coming due, swaps that you can no longer kick the can down the road on, I think is very, very powerful. And I think that there are probably some institutions that are well aware of that too.
Just trying to make. I'm not a TA guy. I think it's all voodoo.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, I will say this too, because I like to quote trade spotting or whatever, like TAs can be a tremendous tool to your advantage, especially if you're looking for a little side income, and it's very risky too. I will say that, but to see certain things and to get in at certain times can be very lucrative if you are versed in TA. But I think to your point about it being voodoo, like a stock like GameStop, where we know, like they shut off the buy button, we don't even have to speculate about it being manipulated. Like that is proof is in the pudding that they did not want certain people having access to this, and that there were not shares. These brokers did not have the shares that were being bought and sold, right? So we can infer that. The Webull CEO even came out and addressed this whole thing, and it was great marketing for them because Robinhood screwed everybody, and Webull was like, oh, everyone go over to Webull, right? So we don't have to speculate that about. So TA in terms of GameStop, I think is very powerful, but with a stock that has been so heavily, I don't know if manipulated is the right word. I'm sure it is for a lot of people. I'm trying to think of a lesser, a less strong term, but it certainly has its advantage. Yeah, there you go. It certainly has its drawbacks too, especially when you have a CEO that it could dilute at any point. Like the TA is not going to predict a dilution. It's unlikely to do that. It's also not going to predict to the second unless there's a bunch of swaps coming due, where Roaring Kitty just posts a yellow update after 8 p.m. one day, and then the stock opens up 30% gap up the next morning. You cannot TA that. No. I mean, you can't. One thing you could do is check the options flow and see that there's 5,000 blocks of GME 20 strike calls, and there's millions of dollars of premium on those, and you can infer that there's a big move coming, like we did in May. But certainly TA wasn't as suggestive of that move.
What do you make of ringing bells and trade 385?
Those are two that I did not research much. And I think the reason why is because
I recommend, sir, that you.
Okay, so I think that'll be my next endeavor. And I think the only reason I haven't gone too far down those rabbit holes is that when you start going down like one of the like 5 rabbit holes that we've talked about, like as soon as you think you've gotten to the bottom of it, there's like a litany of other information that you're like, oh, I wasn't aware of this. Or even like, I think a great example of this is Roaring Kitty's plan initially, like when everyone thought he wanted to join the board or he wanted to get, above 5% ownership or like whatever that whole thing was, like, and then we saw that he had a 13G on Chewy. And we're like, what's he doing with Chewy? It's like you get to a certain point in the rabbit hole and then something changes and you're like, okay, now I got to go deeper, or like I got to go to the side of this rabbit hole and look over there. So it's like I only have so much bandwidth, and I think that a lot of these rabbit holes deserve the attention. I will honor your request because I think all of them are equally interesting.
385, like I.
Do you want to give me like a quick?
Yeah, I will. He really
elevator pitch.
He really pestered me. I'm not gonna lie. That's what I felt like when he was messaging me on Reddit about it. And then the second that I started reading what he was sending me, I was like, "Holy crap!" And then he did it on my podcast and blew my mind even more. So absolute hero. He deserves so much. Like, yeah, props.
Well, definitely send me a link to that episode because I want to dive down that one. And I think that's like a great thing about GameStop too, is that like there's so many of these other, parts of the community within GME that are very knowledgeable of, a subset of these. Some people know everything about everything, but it's like there's a person to go to for any one of those things that we've been talking about. And it's like beautiful because everyone is combing through data, combing through swaps, combing through the option chain, whatever it is. And it's like we have so many eyes all over this thing. And I think that's another thing that Wall Street is starting to realize too, is that like their little games that they were playing for so long are a lot more in the public space now too. And I think one more thing that I did want to mention that I'm not super well versed in either, but is the CAT system. And I think there was a lot of talk about the CAT system, being implemented, and that justice was coming, and all these things. And that is something that I did buy into a little bit at the time, only to realize that like Wall Street and their legal teams are so good with security law that they find these loopholes of how to kick the can indefinitely. And then you see like, oh, okay, now we're delaying the CAT system and like the full reporting of that system. And it's like, so to kind of maybe like start to wind down on this is like, I don't get too engrossed in any one of these things, because like so quickly can the people with all the money squash those like an ant. And that frustrates me to my core, but we are just GME holders, and we are just, at the end of the day, Roaring Kitty and Ryan Cohen, we have entrusted our portfolios to them, and we have to hope that they will eventually prevail in this David versus Goliath type fight.
I hope so too. But to give you the TLDR on Trade 385, basically, most of the clearing houses, or most of the brokerage apps, all the ones that turn the buy button off, they're all on Apex Clearing, right? And they... Oh, I'm going to butcher this now. I'm going to need to watch my own episode back. Basically, they had their value at risk thing triggered in the same way that Robinhood did. And theirs was triggered by this monstrous, unbelievable order for AMC that was done at like... I think after hours, then cancelled, but had to be manually cancelled because of the size of the order. And that's what tripped the VA, the value at risk payment and the ECP charge into like the billions and billions, which is what made them say you can't trade in these securities, which is why the buy button got turned off for all of the apps, right? It's so much bigger than just Robinhood. It's like, whose fucking trade was that? Who ghost traded and fucked the entire system?
Wow. Do you have any theories, by the way?
I have no idea.
I
don't know, but like, I want to know whose fucking money that was. Like, it's so impossible to tell.
And so the order went through.
Yeah, but then it was like a spoofing order, so it was able to be cancelled, but it had to be manually removed from the system due to the size of it. Like, yeah, that's my recollection. Wow. But yeah.
That's got me on pins and needles now, because like that, and I feel like we are witnessing, maybe to a lesser degree, something like that, and it wouldn't surprise me. Like, and I think everyone knows the risk now. Like, if something like that does happen again, like how are they going to deal with it this time around? Now that it already happened and we know it happened.
I don't know. Like, well, they're all loading up, so maybe they're trying to hedge their bets. Where, yeah.
I mean, but like, is there a sacrificial lamb? Like a UBS. Like, I know, again, I'm just going over other tin that I've read over the past however many months. Like, I wonder if, like, because they will eat each other. These hedge funds will eat each other. I wonder if, like, at the end of the day, if this thing does kick off much bigger than we could ever imagine, like, you got to think that someone is going to be on the other side of that trade, and it's not going to be pretty for them.
No. Well, I would say that you look and see who stands to gain or lose the most. Who's loaded up? Who's less? How do you pronounce it? Susquehanna.
Susquehanna. Yeah.
They're a bigger shareholder than Ryan Cohen now. How's he gonna read? Isn't that right?
I thought RC Holdings LLC was still one, but no, it is. No, you're right. It is. Susquehanna. They did just overtake him in Q2 filing.
How's he gonna react? Do you think he'll buy more just so he's the biggest shareholder?
I hope he does, and I hope he does it. I hope he waits a few more weeks, because we have earnings coming up in December, and we all know how that can go, right? They can slam it down on one number, slam it down, right? Or hey, maybe it pops on that too. It's a possibility. But the way that he kicked things off in December of 2019, or December of 2020, excuse me, I really hope that we're going to see something like that. And my final prediction, I'll leave you with this, is um, the way that Roaring Kitty has been mimicking Ryan Cohen almost move for move, dollar for dollar, share for share. I could very much see if Ryan Cohen does not repurchase a large amount of GME, I could see Roaring Kitty trying to recreate that same event in December of this year, where it leads to the settlement in January. And we all know what happened then. And you're talking about a requel. You're talking about a requel with the floor being, what's the safe floor now? Like between $20 and $23, right? Okay, like so. And I'm not trying to hype anybody up. I'm not trying to, bananas bets or hype dates. What I don't do any of that. I'm just thinking that what I've learned about Roaring Kitty now and the moves that he's been making and the joke that he played on the SEC by saying that he was not a cat in his 13G filing with Chewy, would he not like to do a YOLO update via the SEC? Would that not be a wild card? And again, like just something I thought about. It kind of came to me in a little vision, but who knows? If we've learned anything else, and I'll end on this, is that expect the unexpected when it comes to GameStop. The minute we start looking at Lambos for sale and Rolexes and all of that, the next day I wake up and we're down 30% in pre-market. So, that, not to end on a sour note, but I think
It's your fault.
you have to be,
Stop looking
you
at
have to
Lambos.
be, and I'm not, I've learned this lesson. So I just want to say, expect anything, but for me, I'd rather be in this arena. I'd rather be, making a name for shedding light on this insane saga. I know you do the same with your book and your show, and credit to you for doing that. So we need more people like this. We got to get the word out. We got to get eyeballs on this thing. And I think the more grassroots people we have doing this, the more pressure, the more time and pressure we put on the people that are on the wrong side of this move.
And for also the future head of the Department of Health and Human Services owns shares of GameStop. So that's
Which certainly can hurt.
No,
but don't get me started on the fickleness of some of these people like Dave Portnoy. I don't know if Andrew Tate still owns, but that whole thing was funny too. Like in May when he was getting in, and I'm like, and then he got into shit coins, and so
they're just grifting it
like that. That's why I always am like, okay, it's cool to see them tweeting about it, but like the first time for Portnoy, it didn't end well. The second time for Portnoy, he had paper hands. Like that's why it's like trust Ryan Cohen's vision, trust Roaring Kitty. The guy's more calculated than any retail investor in history. You can't even call him retail now. He's bigger than institutions. But trust those two people and leave the rest up to GameStop and trust that they'll figure it out.
Nice place to leave it, man. I know we have a hard stop. So yeah, Reese Politics, everybody. I'll stick the links in the description below. Thanks very much, man.
Thanks for having me. Keep fighting the good fight. And every day, remember, rent is due. So we're in the trenches every day. Market closes Friday, but we're still checking FTDs. We're still checking Casa Bar. We're still doing our whole thing on Saturday and Sunday too. So thank you for having me.
No problem. Hey, listeners, real quick. Do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out. And you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.